Hello everybody, I'm Chris. I'd like to welcome you all back to my series that I am calling Analyzing Literature. So, we've done 10 recordings in this series so far to this day, and in those first 10 installments we did a lot of background planning and explaining of different terms and different literary devices, and we did a couple of practice exercises and a review exercise about characters in conflict, and we did a practice exercise dealing with literary terms and devices. So all of that, as I said, has been pretty much background and introduction to the process of how to analyze literature and how to write essays about literature. So from this point forward, we're going to be doing a little bit of practical explanation and application of these terms and these devices and these short story elements that we've talked about. But more specifically, we're going to be getting into how to compose an analytical essay. So I'm going to actually divide this process up into different stages. And the first stage that we're going to look at is the actual reading of a short story. So we're going to model how to write an analytical essay about a particular short story. Now, I did something similar to that concept with the Cask of Amontillado, where we broke down the story, into different parts and showed how the introduction was made, how the rising action was introduced, how the climax came, and then how the falling action resolution, through a basic understanding of the plot of the story. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually go through a short story, and we're going to divide the short story into different segments. So this whole process will occupy between 2 to 3 or maybe more individual installments in this series. So it's going to be a progression of ideas and a progression of how to do these analytical essays in general. So in order to analyze a story, you have to understand the story, of course. So how is the story organized? Who are the characters? What is the conflict? We talked about all of that. So I have here a story which has been well received, I may venture to say, by the majority of students in the classes that I teach, where we do study the story and students write an analytical essay about the story after taking the test on the story. So it has been fairly well received by students. Most everybody has had a positive reaction to this story. So the title of the story is The Woman in the Snow, and it comes from one of the textbooks, the literature textbooks that I use in my class. So the title of the story, again, The Woman in the Snow. And the writer's name is Patricia McKissack. And a lot of students ask me, is this a true story? Even after finishing it, they ask me, is it a true story? And I have to tell them, no, it's not a true story. It's a fictional story. Although there are some references to historical events and actual historical happenings. There's references to Martin Luther King Jr., for example. There's references to Rosa Parks. So I must give a little preface to this story. The story takes place during the days of segregation in the Deep South of the United States. So a lot of literature that is studied in high schools nowadays, and maybe even in middle schools as well, revolves around how characters deal with racism, or how African American characters have to overcome racism. So as we know, racism is a constant and continuous concern in our society. And every day, practically, we get more and more stories on the news and in our entertainment about racism and the effects of racism and the dangers of racism and how racism has penetrated our country's society and polarized our society to such a large extent. Even, with figures like Colin Kaepernick and the whole kneeling as a part of the protest for Black Lives Matter and these kinds of continuous concerns. And we have had a lot of stories about people losing their jobs over making racist comments through social media, for example, over the past couple of years. So really, racism is a huge issue, not only in this country, but around the world. And a lot of the stories that are brought to the attention of the students in high schools and middle schools have to do with people who are involved in struggles against racism, whether they're African Americans, whether they're Hispanic, whether they're Arabic or Muslim. racism, for whatever reason they're facing, whether it's ethnic related or religious related or even lifestyle related, racism can take many different forms, of course. So this particular story takes place during the days of segregation in the South, which ended pretty much legally, was abolished with the civil rights laws that were passed during the 1960s through the Kennedy administration and then on through Lyndon Johnson's administration as president after Kennedy was assassinated. So the civil rights movement, as we think of it here in America, really started around the year 1955 with the Montgomery bus boycott led by Martin Luther King Jr., which came about as a result of the Rosa Parks arrest. So many times, if I even mention the name Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr., students tell me, oh, I've studied about these people since I was 5 years old. Because generally they are introduced very early in the scholastic careers of students in this particular country. So everybody knows pretty much who Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr. are by a very young age. So before the civil rights movement, 1955, the Montgomery bus boycott, segregation was well established in the South. So as we know, in the southern states, before 1865, slavery was in existence, and then after slavery was abolished, then segregation took over and was legally approved at one time. That separate but equal, that expression separate but equal, came from a Supreme Court case that determined that if people in the South wanted to make a separate school for blacks and a separate school for whites, that would be okay as long as the facilities were equal. Or if they wanted to have a separate section of a restaurant for black people and a separate section for white people, that was okay. Or if they wanted to have separate water fountains or separate whatever, seats on the bus, for example, which would be important for this story. So even in this, every aspect of life was segregated in the South during these days. So we'll get back to the bus issue in a moment. So in this particular story, we have to understand that racism, at least in the first part of the story, because the story is actually divided into different parts, and the second part we'll see what happens with someone who is not racist. But the first half of the story, for sure, we have to come to terms with the fact that the main character in the first part of the story is a bus driver by the name of Grady Bishop, is in fact quite racist and uses racist language. And a lot of people may take offense to that. But again, we have to understand the historical time period. This is why setting is such an important part of the story itself, and what kind of mood and what kind of atmosphere surrounds the setting of a story. Because this story does take place in the years of segregation, as I said, but around the same area as the Montgomery, Alabama area, where they were going to have the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955. So this first part of the story takes place a few decades before the Montgomery bus boycott happens. So the time of this story, roughly speaking, is around the 1920s. So you think about, the southern states during the 1920s, segregation was entrenched in that society. So not to say that everybody in the South was racist, but everybody in the South grew up under a system of segregation. White people and black people were totally separate in their social existences. And that was done by design, by the people in power, in government, lawmakers, judges, courts, all of it. So that's the background of our story. We have to come to terms with that. We have to know that that's an actual historical reality, right? That was a very prevalent problem. And the treatment of, people who were black, African American in those days, was very, very harsh. So we have to understand where the character, Grady Bishop, what kind of environment he grew up in, what kind of society, attitudes, and what he was conditioned to believe, and what he was indoctrinated to believe at a very young age, and grew up in this society to become one of these racist types of people. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to read the story, and then as I read sections of the story, I'm going to pause and we're going to fill in this outline that we see on the board. So for today, I'm just going to do the first part of the story. Because when we come to writing an essay about this particular story, we're going to draw upon these things to include in our essay, in the introduction, in the body, and in the conclusion. Okay? So as I just said, all of that background information I just related is most likely going to form part of your introduction to this essay at the conclusion of this unit. All right? So we're actually doing a unit here. And the story, as I said, so I'm going to read it, but if you would like to follow along at home, I would fully recommend looking up this story on the internet. You'll probably find it quite easily, and you'll have a text that you can follow along with on your internet, on your computer, on your tablet, on whatever device you want to use. So I'm going to read it, and then we'll pause and fill it in. All right? So the main character's name is Grady Bishop. All right? And it begins. Grady Bishop had just been hired as a driver for Metro bus service. When he put on the gray uniform and boarded the bus, nothing mattered. Not his obesity, not his poor education, not growing up the 11th child of the town drunk. Driving gave him power, and power mattered. One cold November afternoon, Grady clocked in for the 3 to 11 shift. "You've got hall tonight," Billy, the route manager, said matter-of-factly. "The Blackbird Express." Grady didn't care who knew about his nickname for the route. Not again. He turned around, slapping his hat against his leg. "Try the Hall Street Express," Billy corrected Grady, then hurried on, cutting their conversation short. "Snow is predicted. Try to keep on schedule, but if it gets too bad out there, forget it and come on in." Grady popped a fresh stick of gum into his mouth. "You're the boss, but tell me, how am I supposed to stay on schedule? What do those people care about time?" Most Metro drivers didn't like the Hall Street assignment even in the best weather, because the road twisted and turned back on itself like a retreating snake. When slick with ice and snow, it was even more hazardous. But Grady had his own reason for hating the route. The Hall Street Express serviced black domestics who rode out to the fashionable West End in the mornings and back down to the Lower East Side in the evenings. "You know I can't stand being a chauffeur for a bunch of colored maids and crooks." "Colored maids and cooks," he groused. All right, now, just based on that, we can fill in numbers 1 and 2 on this board. All right, so let's do it. 3 things we learn about Grady Bishop. So again, the character. What is this author doing? The author is introducing setting, character. Here's our main character, Grady Bishop. What do we learn about him? Number 1, he's miseducated. All right? In other words, he does not have a very high education. It says right there, his poor education. So who knows? Maybe he never finished high school. Maybe he left school after the 8th grade. We don't know exactly, but all it says is that he has a miseducation. He never had a quality and a high educational achievement. So that's one thing we know. Number 2, he's the son of the town drunk. All right, so that's a pretty powerful statement right there in and of itself. It says here, he's the 11th child of the town drunk. So his father had 11 kids, and he was the 11th, right? Apparently. So this term right here, obviously, town drunk, doesn't need a whole lot of explanation, but it will come into effect later on when Grady has this experience with this woman called the Woman in the Snow. Obviously, his father is an alcoholic, or his father was an alcoholic. And being the town drunk means that everybody in the town knows who the town drunk is. So the father was publicly known in his community or in his town where Grady Bishop grew up as being an alcoholic. So what does that tell you? His father was like a disgrace to the town, okay? Because everybody knew who the town drunk was, and it was Grady Bishop's father. And the fact that he was poorly educated, we can also assume that growing up the 11th child of the town drunk and having your family be the town's disgrace is that he didn't have a very positive family life growing up, number two. And that's going to have an impact on his mindset, his attitudes, and his feelings, particularly about his father, which will surface later in the story. But that's one thing that we can say definitely is going to have a serious impact, because we'll find out that his father was quite racist also. So, again, where does Grady Bishop acquire all these racist attitudes and feelings from? Well, a lot of them we're going to find out, came from his father. All right, and then thirdly, we can say that Grady Bishop is racist also. All right? So again, I know that racism, and if you call someone racist nowadays, it's a pretty heavy charge, and you might want to think about it twice before you actually, accuse someone of being racist. But we do have evidence here, and we do have strong evidence that Grady Bishop is racist. And we are going to be able to identify these in number 2. So, how do we know that Grady Bishop is racist? Well, number 1, he calls the route the Blackbird Express. All right? So, this right here is a kind of racial epithet. The actual name of the route is the Hall Street Express, Hall, Hall Street Express. But he calls the route the Blackbird Express. Why? Because who are the passengers mostly from what race? They are almost all black people. As he says, I can't stand being a chauffeur for a bunch of colored maids and cooks. So, the word colored here would refer, of course, to black people. So he calls the route the Blackbird Express. Again, it's a way to identify a certain group of people that he doesn't like by the passengers that he has to drive around, because that's his job. But he doesn't like it. And he makes it clear that he doesn't like it. In fact, he makes it clear that he can't stand it. But that's his responsibility. He can't, say, no, I'm not going to drive the route. He'll get fired. So he calls the route the Blackbird Express. That's one. So he's identifying with a kind of sarcastic, cynical and insensitive comment, putting this name to the route to identify the fact that it serves mostly black people and he can't stand doing that route. All right? So that's one. Number 2. So, this one is a little bit more subtle, but it is in fact an indication of racist attitudes. Because he refers to the black people that he drives around as those people. And the specific lines that he used is this: how am I supposed to stay on schedule? What do those people care about time? So, this is something that indicates, again, a reflection of the segregationist attitude that Grady Bishop has. Because if you're going to refer to a group of people as those people, and later on he's also going to refer to them as you people, what is that telling you? It's telling you that those people over there are not the same kind of my people over here. In other words, my people are my people, and those people are those people. So we're not on the same level. Okay? We're not equal. I'm in my group, you're in your group. Whatever I believe or that I am, you don't belong in this group. You're in your own separate group, so you stay over there. I'm going to stay with my group over here. So he definitely does not identify himself as being, in a way, on the same level or equal in any way to the people that he drives around. As a matter of fact, it does say he gets off on the power that he has in order to control the people on his bus. So, when he's on the bus driving this route, he's like the captain of his own ship. He has all the power. He has all the authority. And that's going to give him this attitude of superiority. And this kind of expression, those people, that also reflects or indicates his feelings of superiority. Okay, because he can tell those people what to do. If he wants to tell them to get off the bus, he'll tell them to get off the bus. And when they get on the bus, he has the power to tell them where to sit on the bus. Oh, you sit in the back. Okay? Because of the fact that the segregation laws support black people sit in the back of the bus, white people sit in the front of the bus. So he has power, he has authority, and he loves that power and authority. But over who? Over those people. All right? So those people are not my people. They're different. So that's an expression of equality? No, that's an expression of difference. And when you get into expressions of difference, that's a reflection of the racist mindset. That people are not the same. People are different, fundamentally different. One person's view is that their group is superior over another group. They have power and authority over that group. They can tell those people what to do, and if they don't do it, they're going to suffer consequences for not doing it. So what is the third indication that he's racist? We're going to get into it in a little bit more detail on the next page. But let's jump down here for number 3 for a moment. Name 3 things that make Grady upset at night. Number 1, he hates driving the route. All right? So when he comes into work and the route manager says, oh, you got Hall Street tonight, he's already annoyed. He's already irritated. He's already aggravated because his boss just assigned him to this route. And we know from his own words that he can't stand driving this route. And on top of that, what else is going to add to his stress is this. All right? There's a big storm expected. So the route manager says, there's snow is predicted. Try to keep on schedule, but if it gets too bad out there, forget it, come on in. So there's a big snowstorm expected. Why is that going to be a problem? Well, obviously, the route itself is not the safest route, even in the best of weather, the story tells us. So if it's a bad, driving circumstance, even in good weather, it's going to be 10 times worse if there's a lot of snow and icy, slushy road conditions out there in general. So he's irritated about being assigned to the route in the first place. There's a big snowstorm expected. He's going to be trying to keep on schedule. His boss does give him the authority to close down the route early if it comes to that where the roads become too dangerous. So even so, the fact that there's a big storm and the snow is going to pile up on the roadways and make it even more hazardous is going to cause him more and more stress. So we're going to get to number 3 in just a moment. So we'll get to number 3 here and number 3 here. So let's flip the page and continue reading the story here. So on the second page, he's still having this conversation with his supervisor, Billy. So Billy says, "Take it or leave it," Billy said, walking away in disgust. Grady started to say something, but thought better of it. He was still on probation, lucky even to have a job, especially during such hard times. So I think that's a reference to, probably safe to assume it's a reference to the time period known as the Great Depression. So this is, again, part of the reason why I know this story starts in the 1920s, late 1920s, early 30s, because of this fact. A lot of people out of work during the Great Depression. And this reference to hard times probably is a reference to that. Now, the story continues. Snow had already begun to fall when Grady pulled out of the garage at 3:01. It fell steadily all afternoon, creating a frosted wonderland on the manicured lawns that lined West Hall. But by nightfall, the winding, twisting, bending street was a driver's nightmare. So there again, the big snowstorm, the road conditions, very hazardous. It's going to give him a lot of irritation if he can't keep on schedule. Now, the temperature plummeted too, adding a new challenge to the mounting snow. Hurry up, I can't wait all day, Grady snapped at the boarding passengers. Get to the back of the bus. He hustled them on impatiently. You people know the rules. So there again, when he refers to the black people now as you people, it's a similar type of thing as when he refers to the black people as those people. Okay? You people, again, are not my people. You people are you people, my people are my people. We're not the same, we're not equal. You do what I tell you, get to the back of the bus. The regulars recognized Grady, but except for a few muffled groans, they paid their fares and rode in sullen silence out to the East Side Loop. "Auntie, now, just why are you taking your own good time getting off this bus?" Grady grumbled at the last passenger. The woman struggled down to the wet, slippery steps. At the bottom, she looked over her shoulder. Her dark face held no clue of any emotion. "Auntie? Did you really call me Auntie?" she said, laughing sarcastically. "Well, well, well. I never knew my brother had a white son." And she hurried away, chuckling. Grady's face flushed with surprise and anger. He shouted out the door, "Don't get uppity with me. You all know Auntie is what we call all you old colored women." Furious, he slammed the door against the bitter cold. He shook his head in disgust. "It's a waste of time trying to be nice," he told himself. All right, let's pause there for a minute. So just from that exchange, we can fill in number 3. He calls the old black woman Auntie. All right, now why is that again an indication of racism? As the woman made a joke sarcastically, flippantly, "Oh, I didn't know my brother had a white son," she's making fun of this Auntie stuff. So it may not be commonly known, but in the old days, and it is also apparent in a couple other stories which take place in this time period, white people would refer to elderly colored women as either auntie or grandma. And it was just a sign, again, of the separation. So when you classify an entire group of people or even subgroups of people like old colored women, and you designate those people with a particular term, like in this case auntie, or in other stories I've seen the word grandma, you're not talking about people as individuals. You're talking about them as stereotypical, or you're putting a whole blanket statement over a group of people. So that any old woman is called auntie, or any old black woman is called grandma. It has nothing to do with family relations. It's a way to designate a particular race or part of that race group as auntie. So it's a very dangerous thing to do, and it shows, again, this mindset of separation or identification. So it is a very small indication of a larger racial attitude. Now, why is he getting upset? Again, he hates driving the route. There's a big snowstorm expected, and he thinks the passengers are taking too much time. All right, what are they taking too much time with? Getting on and off the bus. So he says to the woman, all right, hurry up, I can't wait all day. Get to the back of the bus. And then with this old black woman who he addresses, improperly as auntie, improperly from the sense that it's not his aunt, but improperly also is a social way of showing his, racial attitudes. It's very sort of impolite also. And he says, "Auntie, now just why are you taking your own good time getting off this bus?" So again, the woman is probably not deliberately trying to, make him upset by deliberately taking her own sweet time getting off the bus just to, get a charge out of him. The bus's stairs are wet, it's slippery from the snow, and people's, bringing snow and melting on the steps and all that. So the woman is taking her time because she's old, number one, and two, she doesn't want to fall and hurt herself getting off the bus. But Grady doesn't see it that way. because he's already in a bad mood from being assigned to drive the route, and the route is very dangerous itself. So this actually compounds the problem for him, and he starts shouting at the people. Okay. So she, this woman that he refers to as Auntie, she was actually the last person off the bus. Now, continue. But one look out of the window made Grady refocus his attention to a more immediate problem. The weather had worsened. He checked his watch. It was a little past 9. Remarkably, he was still on schedule, but that didn't matter. He had decided to close down the route and take the bus in. So thinking back to his route manager's instructions at the beginning of the story, his route manager did say to him, you can close the route early and come back if the roads get too dangerous. So this is what Grady decides to do. He's working the 3 to 11 shift, but it's 9 o'clock. 2 hours left on the shift, but still he has the authority and the permission from his route manager to come in early if the roads are too dangerous. So he's not breaking the rules here by closing down the route, but it's like he has no desire to stay out any longer and there's no more passengers on the bus. So he decides to bring the bus back to the bus station. Now, here's what happens next. That's when his headlights picked up the figure of a woman running in the snow, without a hat, gloves, or boots. Although she'd pulled the shawl over the lightweight jacket and flimsy dress that she was wearing, her clothing offered very little protection against the elements. As she pressed forward against the driving snow and wind, Grady saw that the woman was very young, no more than 20, and she was clutching something close to her body. What was it? Then Grady saw the baby, a small bundle wrapped in a faded pink blanket. These people, Grady sighed, opening the door. So again, here's another expression. First he says those people, now he says you people, and now he says these people. All indications of his separatist mindset. These people, Grady sighed, opening the door. The woman stumbled up the steps, escaping the wind that mercilessly ripped at her petite frame. Look here, I've closed down the route. I'm taking the bus in. In big gulping sobs, the woman laid her story before him. I need help, please. My husband's gone to Memphis looking for work. Our baby is sick, real sick. She needs to get to the hospital. I'll know she'll die if I don't get help. Well, I gotta go by the hospital on my way back to the garage. You can ride that far. Grady nodded for her to pay. The woman looked at the floor. Well, pay up and get on to the back of the bus so I can get out of here. I don't have the fare, she said, quickly adding. But if you let me ride, I promise to bring it to you in the morning. Give an inch, you all want a mile. You know the rules. No money, no ride. Oh, please, the young woman cried. Feel her little head, it's so hot. She held out the baby to him. Grady recoiled. Desperately, the woman looked for something to bargain with. Here, she said, taking off her wedding ring. Take this, it's gold. But please don't make me get off this bus. He opened the door. The winds howled savagely. Personification, by the way. The winds howled savagely. Please, the woman begged. Go on home now. You young girls get hysterical over a little fever. Nothing. It'll be fine in the morning. And he shut the door. The last sounds he heard were the mother's sobs, the baby's wail, and the moaning wind. Let's pause there. Question 4. Does Grady show any compassion for the woman? There's 2 parts to this answer. You might think absolutely no, no chance, because he kicks her off the bus. But we have to keep in mind one thing. What was his initial response? So, how did he react when the woman first got on the bus? The woman asks him, begs him, pleads to him, take me to the hospital so I can get my baby checked out at the hospital. I'll know she'll die if we don't get her checked out. And he says, okay, I'll take you as far as the hospital. Even though he had already closed down the route, he says he would take her to the hospital. All right, so we have to give him a little bit of credit for this because he's already closed down the route. He does not have to take on any more passengers. So the fact that he opens the door for her, allows her to come on the bus, and actually agrees to take her to the hospital shows us as readers that even though we may not like him so far, he does in fact show a little compassion for the woman. So I'm going to qualify this answer. Yes, at first. But then, no. Okay? So we have to give credit where credit is due. He does allow her to get on the bus and he does agree to take her to the hospital. But what's the problem? Why doesn't he take her to the hospital? Why does he not do what he says he's going to do? Because one reason only, she doesn't have the bus fare. Okay? Now, I just want to point out a couple of other things that are going on here with this scene. When she gets on the bus, he does say, I got to go by the hospital on the way back to the garage. You can ride that far. And then he says, well, pay up and get on to the back of the bus so I can get out of here. This is a very important point to realize about how deeply entrenched the segregation is in Grady Bishop's mind. Why? Because we already have established that the woman who he called Auntie was the last person off the bus. There are no other passengers on this bus. So when this woman gets on the bus and begs Grady to take her to the hospital so she can get her baby checked out, she is the only passenger on the bus. So therefore, ask yourselves, why does he tell her to get to the back of the bus? All right? Why would he tell the only woman who is on the bus to get in the back of the bus when there are all seats available? So she can sit in the front, the middle, the back, anywhere. Why does he tell her to go to the back? One reason only. That's the law. Black people sit in the back, white people sit in the front. So when she gets on, it's not even a consideration for him to think about it. It's like an automatic response. Black person, back of the bus. All right? He doesn't care about the weather. He doesn't care about the fact that his seat is probably close to the heater and the back of the bus is probably freezing cold. He doesn't care. These things do not enter his mind. All he knows is that black people sit in the back of the bus. So that is a very strong indication of the segregationist attitude which is ingrained in his mind. And he will not bend the rules or break the rules even in an emergency situation. Even though he could have very easily said, okay, sit there near the front, wherever, and let's go. So that's one thing. The second thing is that he does not take her to the hospital because she doesn't have bus fare. All right? So how much bus fare are we talking about? Well, nowadays I know from my students that bus fare in the city where I teach is about $1.25 a ride. In 1920 or 1930, we're talking about what? 5 cents? 10 cents at the most? I don't really know, but it couldn't have been more than 10 cents back in the 1930s. If you could buy a loaf of bread for 5 cents, you're not going to pay 35 cents for a bus ride. So the fact of the matter is, he will not bend the rules for this woman. And he says specifically, you know the rules, no money, no ride. Okay? If the woman does not have the money to pay for the bus ride, he will not take her for free. Even though she doesn't want to ride for free. She says, one, I'll give you the money tomorrow. And that doesn't work. So then what does she do? She offers her gold wedding ring. A wedding ring made of gold is going to be a hell of a lot more valuable than 25 cents or even 10 cents for a bus ride. He doesn't have any conception of charity. He's not going to bend the rules for a colored woman. So his only choice is get off the bus. And that's what he does. He kicks her off the bus. So it would be very easy for him to allow her to ride on the bus and then take the gold wedding ring as collateral. No chance. He's not going to bend the rules or break the rules for any colored woman. This is how his mind works. No money, no ride. Black and white. So, in the next part of this story, we're going to find out what happens with the woman. That's about all for now. We're going to continue looking at the story in detail with the next section of the story, and we'll continue our discussion at that time. Thank you for watching. Hopefully this is a good introduction, and we'll continue the story in our next video.